God cannot deny himself. But there's always this lingering concern when God makes a promise or we enter into an agreement, even in life. We enter into a contract or maybe even a marriage or whatever it is. There's this lingering concern that somebody's going to renege. You know that word, renege? It's a bad word. It sounds like a kind of racial thing. It's not racial at all, but it is a bad word. When you renege on something, it's never good. When you renege, the definition of this is backing out of an agreement. When you back out of a contract, you renege. Failing to do what you said you would do, failing to keep a promise. And now, can you ever do that? Is it ever acceptable to be able to renege out of a contract? Well, let's take a financial contract, for instance. There's a couple instances in which this is possible. It's generally frowned upon, but if you cannot maintain the terms of the agreement, that's called declaring bankruptcy. And so you can renege a contract by declaring bankruptcy, and you can get out of that contract. Or if the other party can't maintain the terms, then you can foreclose. So you either declare bankruptcy or you either foreclose. And out of our passage today, we will see that God's word never declares bankruptcy. And his word never forecloses. Even when the other party doesn't fulfill the terms, he does not declare bankruptcy, and he does not foreclose on us. 2 Timothy 2:13 says this, and this is really the theme of today's passage. If we are faithless, God remains faithful. He cannot deny himself. He remains true to his word. Now, as a father, sometimes I have trouble keeping my word. I'm a pretty good guy. I hope I'm a good dad. But sometimes, I grew up and my dad, anytime he told me anything, I knew it wasn't going to happen. My dad never really stuck around. He was well-intentioned. He'd make these promises, and they just wouldn't materialize. So I learned to say, hey, thank you, but knowing that's not probably going to happen. I've always said I didn't want to be like that, but sometimes I catch myself still being like that. I'll make a promise to my kids. They go through these summer reading programs, and so we assign these like prizes for them and stuff. And I mean well, and so they get done with these books, and a couple years later, I have not made good on my promise. So I've promised like sporting events, music concerts, a trip to the zoo. It takes me a while sometimes to get around to those. Or sometimes I promise X amount of dollars. If you go out and do this chore, I'll give you $20. And about 3 months later, Ezra will come and say, hey, Dad, have you ever paid me that $20? Or sometimes you make these, you assign consequences to your kids. And then sometimes it's a double-edged sword. You assign the consequence, and they get a consequence, and then it affects you. And so you're going to bed early today, and I had plans for later, and I can't do the plan with the family because I got a kid going to bed early. Or no movies this week, and we want to sit down and watch a movie, and so I can't watch the movie because I've already assigned it's hard to follow through on your word, whether it be a good thing or a bad thing. And so far in Genesis, we're starting to get the sense that God always remains true to what he says. Always. So he says, all of these trees, you can eat of all these trees, just don't eat of that tree right there, for in the day that you eat of that tree, you shall surely die. And what happens? They eat of the fruit, and death enters into the human race. Because he had to remain true to his word. He said it, and now it has to happen. And then the serpent beguiles Eve and tricks her, and she eats. And then all of a sudden, they're into this death thing. And he promises that she would have, this is in Genesis 3:15. This is huge. Great promise that he promises. He says, you will have an offspring that will crush the head of the serpent. He's going to come and he's going to destroy the works of the devil. So that's the promise he made. And then last week we looked at the first children, Cain and Abel. And she's thinking, man, this is the offspring. I have gotten a man by the help of the Lord. However, he goes and murders his brother, and he's sent away in exile. And you wonder, wow, is God going to renege on his word? Is he going to back out of this whole thing because mankind has fouled this thing up so greatly? And the lingering question is, as we enter into our passage today, is God going to make his word true? So let's look at Genesis chapter 4. Last week we looked at verses 1 through 16. We'll pick up today at verse 17, and we'll read through the end of the chapter. So we're going to follow Cain, east of Eden. He's driven out of the garden, and we're going to see what happens with the rest of this story. So verse 17. We have this. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. Now, so we got a little family tree going on here. And the perennial question, whenever you read verse 17, unbelievers will always ask, okay, you've got Cain and Abel's no longer here because he's been murdered by his brother, and that's all you have. So, who did Cain marry? Right? Well, we look at chapter 5, verse 4, and we know that these guys lived a long time, right? And verse 4 in chapter 5 says that Adam, he had other sons and he had other daughters. Now, something we need to realize about the Bible is that it's very specific. It's selective. And it's not comprehensive. The Bible doesn't tell you all that there is to know. It's not a comprehensive book. It's very selective. It's using certain people for certain reasons. But Adam and Eve lived for a long period of time, and they had all kinds of kids. And so undoubtedly, Cain married his sister. Now, back in that day, the genetic pool was pure and clean, and there was no problems of inbreeding and the consequences of congenital defects and all that stuff like there is today. Back then, he was able to take his sister, call her wife, and he and she conceived, bore a son named Enoch. When Cain built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. So he called the city Enochville. To Enoch was born, and then we get this genealogy. Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered Mehujael, and Mehujael fathered Methushael, and Methushael fathered Lamech. And Lamech took 2 wives. Now Lamech becomes really the central figure of this whole story. He becomes the main character. He's 7 generations from Adam. And we see under his roof, shall we say, civilization begin to take shape. Verse 19, and Lamech took 2 wives, and the name of the one was Adah, and the name of the other was Zillah. And Adah, she bore Jabal, and he was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all who play the lyre and the pipe. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all the instruments of bronze and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. So you see agriculture start to take shape, the arts and sciences, music and geology, mineralogy, all this stuff, all the implements of culture are starting to take root, and civilization is starting to take place. But as this culture starts to develop, morality starts to decline. And so as you look at this, you see that Lamech, his life really exemplifies this moral decline. And things get worse and worse and worse. So Adam, pretty bad. He disobeys God. Cain, his son, even worse. He murders his son. And then Lamech is even worse yet. So things are getting really, really bad. And as we will see here in verse 23 and 24, Lamech is the epitome of pride, of arrogance, and self-centeredness. So we're going to really kind of zone in and kind of hone in on these two verses. And these two verses really comprise what you would call the Song of Tyranny. This is how bad culture has gotten. Lamech stops and he declares this here in verse 23 and 24. He says, Lamech says to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's revenge is 77-fold. And so as you see here, this song really will show us three signs of moral corruption. We see a culture that has taken root and is literally, utterly corrupt. And you can see it in the song. So we're going to look at this song here, and through it, we're going to see three signs of corruption. If you want to judge any culture against these three signs, you will see how corrupt it actually is. So as we go through these two verses here, we're going to take a look at American culture, at our lives, and see how this applies. So the three signs of moral corruption are these. Lamech takes an extra wife. Then he takes somebody's life, and then he takes God's grace for granted. He takes an extra wife, he takes somebody's life, he takes God's grace for granted. And so these are the signs of a morally corrupt society. Let's look at these one at a time. The first one here is he takes an extra wife. As if one is not enough, he takes an extra. This is the first mention of polygamy in the Bible. And it didn't take long. I mean, this is the 4th chapter of the Bible, and you already have a man trying to take an extra wife. And you can see the advantages of taking a wife, an extra one, right? More help, more companionship, more sex, more convenience. Why would a guy want a second wife? If she's goods and services. We throw around a term that in today's society a lot about objectifying women. And this is something very serious that we are in today. We objectify women way too often. This is a sign of a morally corrupt society. Anytime we objectify anybody, we know we have gone the wrong way. And although we're not a polygamous society, we are a very pornographic society. And that's because we have objectified women. Objectification, you know, that term, if you were to define it, whenever we objectify somebody is when we degrade them to the status of an object. Anytime you depersonalize anybody and they all of a sudden become goods and services or commodities or somebody who actually just does things for you, you have objectified them. And in this case, it's the woman becomes the object of sexual desire. And let me tell you something. When I was a young man, I really struggled with this. We live in a world that just objectifies women, and then as a young man, you got the hormones going. You're listening to music, and I used to listen to the rap stuff and hip hop and all that stuff, and those lyrics were just so full of that stuff. And the guys I hung out with school and all this stuff, I had a poster of Christy Brinkley on my wall. And then I had a subscription to Sports Illustrated, and then you would get the swimsuit issue, and then just these things would just start to filtrate my mind, and then I remember one time, me and my buddy for a spring break, I think I was 19. We went down to I was 18, and we went down to Disney World, and we were like, "Oh, did you see that girl?" And we would just gawk at their beauty. And we would talk about women as if they were objects. And I think the thing that really started to help me come out of that is when I started to seek the Lord, I think he began to say, "Hey, Demetrius, when you gawk at a woman, just remember she is a person." Whenever I see a beautiful woman and I'm tempted to lust, I got to remember that is a person. When I look at a beautiful woman on a magazine or on the internet and stuff, I got to remember that is a person. She's not an object of desire. She's a person. So those ladies dancing at the Super Bowl halftime, they're people. I saw that and I had to click it off because, whoa, I know there's a little bit of a controversy on that, and some people think, well, that's just culture. No, that's objectification, whatever culture it is. Now, I'm going to speak as a guy here and say that stuff is seductive. And if that's all I see, if that's all I know of you, then you're not doing yourself any favor in projecting yourself like that to me. So any woman who puts herself out there in that kind of manner objectifies herself and does not do herself or her kind any favors. The woman who will engage in this will objectify herself, and I'm going to say, you're better than that. And you're more than that. And women are beautiful, but they are more than what their beauty portrays. A woman's value does not come from fulfilling a sexual role, or for that matter, any role. Her value does not come from what she does. It comes from who she is. A woman is a person, not a possession, not an object, not a commodity. She's not goods and services, and she's not to be taken advantage of. Women don't get their value from what they do. They don't even get their value from who they belong to. I ran across this slide some time ago, and I think this is a perfect description of what we're talking about. It says this: she's someone's sister, mother, daughter, and wife. True statement. But is that where her value comes from? Her value doesn't come because she does something or she is somebody to somebody. It's the fact that she is someone. We don't objectify her into any of these roles. She is created and fashioned in the image of God. And that's ground zero. And any time a society takes any person and puts an object to their value, then we've turned it upside down and caused a very morally corrupt situation to take place. Women get their value from being someone who is created in the image of God. And whoever tries to play a woman or use a woman for his own advantage is guilty of gross sin. And Lamech, he is the consummate narcissist. Women exist for me. People exist for me. And one woman is not enough. I have to take two. And people become objects that serve our purposes when we think this way. Moral corruption. So 3 big signs that moral corruption has taken place is one, that he takes this extra wife. Number 2 is that he takes somebody's life. Look here in the last part of verse 23. He says, I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. And it's interesting here. I either use somebody as an object or I discard somebody as an object. It's both objectification. If I'm going to use you for my purposes, when you really serve my purposes well, I will use you. But if you don't serve my purposes well, I will destroy you. I will remove you. I will eliminate you. Both are objects, just handled in different ways. So I get rid of the people I don't want, and I use the people that I do. You no longer serve my purposes, and in fact, you're standing in my way, so I will dispose of you. I will get rid of you. And this is what Lamech does. He uses people, and he abuses people. We use women. It's interesting, but we tend to eliminate men. We either use people who are weaker than us physically, or we eliminate people who are stronger than us. And it's this kind of utilitarian view of people. We use people as utilities. They're objects to serve us somehow, and if they don't serve us, then we get rid of them. So, it's the idea of, if you hurt me, I will eliminate you. I will make you pay. I will get you back. I will assassinate your character, and I will destroy your reputation. Don't cross me, because I will eliminate you. So, Lamech, morally corrupt, right? He uses people. He abuses people. 3 big signs. He takes a wife. He takes somebody's life. And then we see that he takes God's grace for granted. Look at verse 24. It says here, if Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's revenge is 77-fold. He's talking back to the time when Cain was afraid because he had murdered his brother. He was being sent off as a fugitive, and God said, hey, I'm going to protect you. If anybody does the same thing to you that you did to your brother, I will take vengeance on him 7-fold. And then we have Lamech here. He says, well, if God did that for Cain, he'll do it for me and much, much more. So if God will do that 7 times for him, he'll do that 77 times for me. So he presumes on God's grace. God's grace was shown in Cain, but he just presumes that that will be shown in his life. So he takes, Lamech here, he takes sex from a woman, he takes power from a man, and he takes grace from God. He presumes upon a woman, he presumes upon a man, he presumes upon God, he presumes in all directions. His life is thoroughly about himself. He is self-aggrandized, and he is self-presumptuous, or he's just centered on himself, presumptuous of a God. He just expects And anybody who lives a life like this and expects God to just pour out the grace is morally corrupt. Sometimes our society is very much that way. We just presume that God will take care of us as we go along our merry way. So I believe Lamech is really the prototype of how bad society has gotten. At the very beginning of Genesis 3, we had no sin. At the very end of Genesis 4, we have this. So we can see how fast sin has proliferated itself all throughout the human race, and we got this very terrible situation. Yet, verse 25 is where the gospel comes into play. No matter how bad things get, even when you are at your worst, God remains at his best. Does he renege? Does he pull out? What was his word? He said to Eve, and look at it from Eve's point of view, you will have an offspring that will crush the head of the serpent. The serpent got you into all this, I know that. But I am sending you an offspring. And so she receives offspring. And Cain, she says, I have got the man with the help of the Lord. This is what she says about Cain. The anticipations were high. And then he goes and he kills his brother, and he is sent off into exile. So she loses a son by murder, and she loses another son by exile, and this son becomes this nation. And so has God gone bad on his word? Verse 25 is an indication of the faithfulness of God. Does he foreclose on the deal? Does he renege? Has he forgotten Genesis 3:15? He has not. Let me read verse 25. And Adam knew Eve, his wife, again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me, what? Another offspring. He has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed Abel. He has appointed for me another offspring. And the Bible tells us that this is the family line that eventually led to Jesus. He doesn't give up. God doesn't walk away. When we are at our worst, God remains at his best. He cannot deny himself. And that's why we're all still here. We've all descended into corruption. Every single one of us. We have all walked away. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. And yet, God remains faithful to us. He doesn't renege. He doesn't back out. God has appointed for me another offspring. I love that phrase. And when all hope is lost, he keeps his promise alive. Even when it seems like plan B. You know, we have these, we have these hopes. We place these hopes in life. I mean, we have these thoughts. We have these, Eve had Cain and she thought, that's him. I've gotten a man. This is the answer. God promised me offspring, and she received offspring, and she was like, that's it. And it wasn't. And I think that's where we sometimes, I think this is a takeaway from this morning, sometimes we place so much hope on our plan A's. Cain was her plan A. And plan A didn't work out. That business didn't work out. That relationship didn't work out. That opportunity didn't work out. That ministry didn't work out. Whatever that plan A is, if you have a plan A and it doesn't work out, just realize that sometimes we fall in love with plan A. And when I think we need to really fall in love with the planner. Sometimes we put so much hope and stock into people, into things, into opportunities, thinking this is the answer. But God says, no. Even if it was the answer, do not put the answer above the person who gives the answer. Do not put the gift above the giver. Don't put the plan above the planner. Keep me front and center in your life. God remains faithful. We just don't know how he is going to fulfill his word, but he will fulfill his word. He cannot deny himself. I don't know who this word is for this morning, but I really felt strongly as I was wrapping the sermon up that there is somebody here. And Adrian, I'll have you come up. There is somebody here that has suffered disappointment because you have put your full weight on plan A, and plan A didn't work out. Did God fail you? Did God renege? Did he back out? He has not. We don't got the full picture. We don't understand how he's going to bring it about. Sometimes he doesn't draw a straight line between this and this. Sometimes you have to go around and around and around and around, and plan B comes and you don't even recognize it as another viable plan. But let me encourage you with this, that if God speaks a word, he is going to fulfill it. He is faithful. Even when we become faithless, even when we let him down, he cannot deny himself. He's faithful. He's faithful. He's faithful. So God, thank you for your word. Thank you for the reminder. Thank you for always staying with us. You never leave. You never forsake us. You are loyal to the very end. You are loyal without an exit strategy. You're not trying to get out of anything, even when we mess it up so royally. You still pour your grace, and help us not to presume upon your grace, but help us be confident that you are graceful, gracious, good, faithful. Help us, Lord, to look for you and not just for the things that you're trying to do. Help us to look to you, we pray. In the name of Jesus. Amen. So we're going to sing one last song. And if we can, that song, Yes and Amen, if we can throw that in there too a little bit. All of God's promises are what? Yes and amen. Not no and maybe. He is good for his word. That's just who he is. That's his character. So I'm going to ask you to stand this morning for one last song. Let's remind ourselves of the character of God. He is faithful, and he cannot deny himself. So let's sing to him one last song here.